What were you wearing? What were you wearing? Or were you drinking? Why don't you just leave? One of the reasons why a lot of victims fail to report their assault for fear that they will be shamed. I had a Jezebel spirit around me, and that I had the spirit of perversion around me, which is the reason why I experienced being assaulted. Hi, ladies. Welcome back to my channel. I started this channel as a means of catharsis for me going through my healing journey. And so this channel, I talk about everything from healing and, my therapy and life lessons to fashion, beauty, and lifestyle. So my goal is always to encourage you, to inspire you, and to empower you along your personal journey by sharing mine. Now, if you're new here, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon if this is content that you are interested in and that you enjoy. Today, we are going to be diving into an important and sensitive topic, and that is victim shaming and victim blaming. There's a lot going on in the news where this type of behavior is being perpetrated. And so what I would like to do is I want to explore what these terms mean: victim shaming, victim blaming, and I want to share some real world examples. I'm also going to include my own personal experience, and I'd like to talk about how we can better support those who have been affected, right? So let's jump right into the video. First, let's define these terms. What does it mean? Victim shaming. Victim shaming is when an individual is criticized or blamed for their own victimization. So in essence, they are being blamed and they are being criticized for their own experience, okay, as a victim. Now, this could involve questioning their choices, questioning their actions, or questioning their character, like essentially suggesting that they are somehow at fault for what happened to them, right? Now, like I said, we'll get into some examples of what this looks like in real life so that we can call it out when we see it happening, but also so that we gain the awareness of this type of behavior if we are the ones perpetrating it, right? So, because it's not always everybody else, right? We make mistakes, we do things too, and sometimes, when we don't have that awareness, and it may not be intentional, but it is hurtful nonetheless to the person who is experiencing it, on our end, right? We're re-victimizing them by shaming them. Now, on the other hand of victim shaming, there's victim blaming, which refers to placing the responsibility on the victim rather than on the perpetrator, which is where the blame belongs. Now, this can manifest as attributing the victim's own suffering to their behavior or their decisions rather than acknowledging the actions of the person who caused the harm, right? Both victim shaming and blaming are harmful, they are unjust, and they can significantly impact the healing process for a victim. Essentially, it is a re-victimization, right? So, like I said, I want to look at some real world examples of, on this so that we can better understand it. Okay. Okay. So the first example, SA. Common example of victim shaming is when a survivor of SA is asked questions like, what were you wearing? Or were you drinking? These types of questions implies that their choice of attire or their state, their level of inebriation contributed to the assault, which is unjust and it is unfair and it is incredibly hurtful. And it is one of the reasons why a lot of victims fail to report their assault for fear that they will be shamed for whatever choices they made. Now, another example would be DV. In cases of domestic violence, victim blaming, victim shaming might sound like, why don't you just leave? Why did you stay so long? These questions fail to acknowledge the complexities and barriers that make leaving an abusive relationship so difficult. There are financial barriers, right? If you have been married to someone, if you've been married to someone and you haven't worked and you're dependent on their income to care for yourself and or your children, if there are children involved, having to pack up and start a life again is very challenging and it is difficult. A victim has to consider, to take into account, how will they survive financially if they've been dependent on their partner, their spouse, their husband, or their wife for that matter, or their parent, right? For all of these things, how will they survive if they're not there? Will they find them somehow? Are they going to be on the run forever? Right? So there are so many questions, nuances that goes through the mind of a victim when they are in that type of situation. And so failing to acknowledge that and saying to them, why don't you just leave, can be incredibly hurtful. Okay, so now another example would include financial fraud. Now, when someone falls victim to financial fraud, victim shaming could sound something like, you should have been more careful with your money. How could you trust this person? And this statement overlooks the deceptive tactics of the person or people or whoever committing the fraud, right? Who is the ones actually committing the offense. Saying things like that implies to the victim that they're stupid, they're not savvy, right? How could you not know any better, right? And that sort of shaming, again, causes people to not report these types of incidents and, causes them to suffer in silence. And we don't want to do that. We don't want people to suffer in silence when they have been taken advantage of, when they are the victims of any type of assault or, grievous or any type of offense. Okay, so now that we've looked at some examples, I want to talk about something that is often overlooked, and that is shaming through forced forgiveness. Sometimes victims are really pressured to forgive and or reconcile with their perpetrators before they are ready. This happened with me. And I found it very detrimental to the healing process. It felt like an additional burden. I had been victimized. I had, had someone commit an offense against me. And yet here I was now, while trying to process what happened to me, I was now straddled with the burden or the responsibility of being the one to forgive if I wanted to experience healing. And that forced forgiveness, I don't think is talked about a lot. And it's something that I feel needs to be talked about more, because I feel we need to be really mindful of it when it is happening or when we are committing it. So forced forgiveness, what is that even, right? It involves pushing someone to forgive their aggressor or move on from their trauma before they have had the chance to properly grieve that offense and or heal. Healing is ongoing, but to just be able to properly grieve, when you invalidate someone's feelings and their experiences or their experience, it further complicates the recovery, the emotional recovery. And in essence, again, just could act as another traumatic point in their process. Now, everyone processes trauma differently, and there's definitely no one size fits all approach to healing at all. The grieving process in and of itself is unique to each individual and can include a range of emotions from denial and anger to acceptance and moving forward. Let's talk about the different stages of grieving, right? The stages of grieving typically include denial, which is refusing to accept the reality of the situation. Okay. Anger can include anger, which is a feeling of frustration or resentment towards the situation, toward other people, the perpetrator, and even toward yourself. Bargaining, which is an attempt to make deals or changes to reverse or lessen the impact of what happened. Depression, experiencing deep sadness and reflection over the incident. And finally, acceptance, which is coming to terms with the reality and finding a way to move forward. This process, depending on the severity of the offense, can take anywhere from, a day for something very small, and it can take years for something that cut someone to the core, that was incredibly traumatic. And shaming someone through forced forgiveness without being mindful of the grieving process, where that person is in the process, what their capacity is even for going through the process, is very hurtful and serves to only further their suffering and the time that it takes for them to actually heal. Now, supporting a friend or loved one who has been victimized is not easy. It takes empathy. It takes patience. It takes understanding, right? And even if you are a victim and you're learning to heal and you're learning to process everything, you should have these things for yourself. Have some patience with yourself. Have some compassion for yourself for what you've been through. Okay? But some ways that we can help our friends and loved ones through this process. But some ways that we can help our friends and loved ones through the process would be listening. Just listen. Be there to listen without judgment, without interruption. Just listen. You want to validate their feelings. So validation is a little different than justifying their feelings, but validation and the validating of someone's feelings looks like just acknowledging their emotions and their experiences without trying to minimize them for them, right? And you can validate their feelings without minimizing them by just listening. I hear what you're saying. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Without minimizing, by saying, it'll be okay. It wasn't that bad. Oh, it happens to everybody, right? So we want to validate our friend or our loved one's emotions and how they are feeling by just acknowledging them without judgment. You want to avoid asking for details. Please, please respect your friend and loved one's privacy and avoid probing for details that they may not be ready to share or they may not want to ever share, right? So listen for as much as they are willing and ready to share, okay? You can offer practical help, like assisting with tasks around the house, bringing food, but you can also provide professional resources that you think might be helpful to them, whether it is a referral to a therapist or, to another type of doctor or something like that, or to a support group even. Those types of things are very helpful, and it does show your friend and your loved one that you are listening and that you do care and that you are validating their experience. And like I said, just be patient. Understand that healing takes time. Support them through each stage of their recovery, because trauma recovery is serious business. And like I said, there's no one size fits all, okay? The best way to support someone is to be compassionate and non-judgmental. Victim shaming and victim blaming only add to their burden, while understanding and being supportive can help them heal and regain their strength. Now, I said that I was going to share my own personal story with you guys, with my experience with being shamed and blamed for being or for experiencing an assault. So, as a child, I experienced SA, and this was through, it was multiple people who had taken advantage of me. And as I said, I was a child. And when I shared what had happened to me, not the first time I shared it, when I told my mom, and my mom did a great thing. She got me out of the situation. As an adult, I shared what had happened to me with another person. And that person, while I believe they were trying to be helpful, at least that's what I want to believe in my heart, while they were trying to be helpful, they said something that at the time, because I didn't understand it, because I was still so deep in thinking and believing that I was at fault for those things happening to me as a child, I listened to what this person, who I believe loved me, I listened to what they said, and I took the words in that they gave me, and they stuck with me for a number of years, truly until recently, where I became aware that, hey, wait, that wasn't right. That was shaming. That was shaming. And so what this person said to me was that, and this was a person who was a Christian, and like I said, who I trusted. And the person said to me that I had a Jezebel spirit around me, and that I had the spirit of perversion around me, which is the reason why I experienced being assaulted as a child by trusted members of my family. And like I said at the time, when this person said this to me, I believed it, right? I was already grappling with the fact that maybe if I hadn't locked the door when my stepfather told me to lock the door and I just ran out, then I would have been okay, right? Which wasn't my responsibility. I should not have been put in that position as a young child. But I was still grappling with that thought process as a grown woman. And when I heard you have the spirit of perversion around you and you have a Jezebel spirit, I absolutely took that on because something was coming that was coming from someone who I trusted with my story. That was someone who I loved and who I know loved me. And like I said, perhaps that was their way of trying to rationalize what had happened or trying to understand it. But that was incredibly shameful to say to a person, the reason this happened to you is because you have this spirit around you and somehow, you have to get rid of it, right? So it was like a double shame. I'm being shamed for being assaulted. I'm being blamed and shamed for being assaulted. But then also, it was kind of like a religious shaming because now, right, I had this Jezebel spirit and a spirit of perversion that over all these years, I still hadn't been able to, to rectify or to get off of me. So I wasn't a good Christian, right? I wasn't saved. And I needed to get saved. So that stuck with me for such a long time, as I said, until I became aware, probably just a couple of years ago that no, that wasn't a nice thing to say to me. That wasn't the right thing to say to me. And it did not serve to help me through my recovery, experiencing that trauma, realizing that it was shameful and that it was judgment of me where I did nothing wrong. I was a kid. Realizing what it actually was, what those statements were, gave me relief, freed me from believing that something was inherently wrong with me or I had this thing on me as to why I, suffered those things. It wasn't my fault. And so if this type of shaming and blaming has occurred like with you, or you find yourself, making comments like that to someone who is sharing their story or their experience with you, I think maybe, hopefully this will serve as a reminder or a reminder to just be more mindful of the things that we say to others when they are sharing their experiences with us. So I want to say thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more content on important topics or conversations like this. And please, if you feel so inclined, share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I'd love to see what you guys have to say. I think this is an important conversation that we can continue. Okay, so until next time.